Good morning, this is Judy Miller, the Environmental Program Manager for the Urbana Park District. I'm here at the Native Purpose Nature Center this morning. Going to take a hike to see what signs of late summer and fall we have. Here we have Coreopsis in the habitat garden, almost finished flowering, along with some ironweed, the tall purple flowers. These are late summer flowers. You'll find these out at Meadowbrook as well. And then over by our donation hike for the Habitat Gardens, we have brown-eyed Susans blooming as well. Let's go see what's happening in the woods. I'm still around the Habitat Gardens right out front of the Nature Center. We have some white asters with really delicate, pretty petals. And right next to it, we have a nice tall Indian grass. Also growing in the Habitat Garden are our New England asters. They're a lovely fall purple color. We did some weeding just a week ago. This was really overgrown, and some volunteers from the Champaign County Audubon Society came out to help us. So now you can actually see the bird feeders and some of the plants growing here. Notice that there is some interpretive signage. Stop and see the types of animals and plants that are in this site. This white oak is located right in front of the Nature Center, right before you take the path through the Gateway Trail. Its tree seeds, the acorn, can be seen. There's quite a bit. The squirrels will be very happy this fall. When you come out in a couple weeks, be careful where you walk, because they are a bit like marbles. Right outside the Nature Center by the campfire circle, we have these two stones. These are millstones that were used at a mill that used to be over by the Boneyard and Silver Creek. They were donated to the Park District back in the 1920s. Millstones are like fingerprints. The design of them and the scarring are very unique to the person who created them. Please note when you come visiting the trails at Busey Woods that your dog and your bicycle are not allowed. We ask that you look but not pick items and stay on the trails. This is the Gateway Trail exhibit. It talks about the types of wildlife that come to this habitat garden area that we've planted to attract insects and produce berries and seeds that attract birds and other wildlife. We are walking toward the bridge that takes you across the Saline Branch into Busey Woods. And here we have another interpretive node that talks about the history of the woods and shows you a trail map. There's also a nice area to sit down and enjoy or rest after your hike before you walk up the hill back up to the parking lot and the Nature Center. I've walked across the bridge to the intersection of the south trails into the woods. This area was underwater when I was last filming in May, but we've had no rain of any substance in a couple weeks. The boardwalk trail is in front of us, and there's an intersection coming up where you can take a right or a left and follow the boardwalk trail around. It's about 1/3 of a mile, easily done. We're asking people to take a right so that we have a one-way travel during COVID. The Nature Center is closed right now. We hope to start guided visits in October. There are two plants vining on the trees here. One has 5 leaflets. This is Virginia Creeper. It'll turn a really brilliant red in a couple weeks as fall approaches. Right across from it, on another tree, we have a plant with 3 leaves. This is poison ivy. All of the plant of poison ivy, the roots through the stems and leaves, are poisonous. But notice that there's holes in some of these plants. It also produces some really pretty red berries. Those are edible by insects and birds. If you touch poison ivy, the best thing to do is to wash that area of your body with dish soap and cold water. The oil of the plant is what causes the reaction on your skin. Here we are at the next intersection. One trail will take you down the Power Line Trail. This trail is managed with prairie edge plants so that the power company doesn't have to come in and cut limbs off of trees. We're gonna follow this trail map suggestion and head to our right into the woods. Let's go. Along the boardwalk trail, you'll find lots of this plant. This is jump seed. And it's called that because its seeds will jump if touched. It's its way of dispersing its seeds away from the parent plant. Did you know that you can identify trees not only by its leaves or flowers, but also by its bark? This is really helpful in the wintertime when the leaves and the flowers are not in production. This tree here was my first Illinois tree that I learned when I moved from Ohio. It's called hackberry. It's very common in Champaign-Urbana. Grows to be a very big tree. One of the ways to remember it is it looks like somebody came along with an axe and just hacked sideways onto the tree, and it has these long ridges. We'll see what other trees we can identify by bark today too. Here's a tree that's bark is somewhat telling and whose leaves are way up high, so we can't really use that to identify it, but it does have another telltale. It has thorns growing out of it, and that makes this the honey locust tree. I'm at the first pop out in the woods where you can stop and look at the interpretive information, but even more interesting are these holes that we find in the bench. These are made by carpenter bees. They're one of many native bees that live solitary, and the carpenter bee drills these holes to lay its eggs, and we put out some interpretation for that as well. The interpretive signage here talks about the change of scenery. Right now we're still in the summer mode in the woods. As you can see, everything's still pretty green. We still have some flowers that are blooming. The leaves are still on their trees and haven't changed color. But come back in a few weeks and we'll start seeing some really serious changes. I'm going to be videotaping these on a weekly basis for the next couple months so that you can experience this with us. And when you come for a hike, you'll know what you're seeing. Now we're walking up to the next pop-out spot in the boardwalk trail. This is an overlook on the ponds, on the North Pond in Busey Woods. But as you can see, there's no water. These ponds are very seasonal. The water source is all runoff, snow and rain. So the animals that live here have to be able to survive the dry period. So you won't find fish in our ponds in the spring. You will find lots of macroinvertebrates, which are either insects or insect larvae, babies, or we do get frogs, and we do have salamanders here too. This exhibit invites you to look at all levels of the forest, starting from the bottom to the ground, even below the ground by rolling over a log, all the way up to the canopy. There are animals and even plants that live in all levels of the forest, and each of the trees are a habitat in themselves, as they are home and food for many of the plants and animals that live here. When I was last videotaping out here, it was the waning spring wildflowers that we found in this area. Now, as you can see, the forest floor is just brown with green. Here we have a patch of pawpaw growing. They do produce an edible fruit that the animals in the forest are happy to have. We ask that you do not pick or collect in the Park District's natural areas. That includes Busey Woods, Meadowbrook, Weaver Park, and Perkins, where the dog park is. You're welcome to come and enjoy, but let's leave the fruit for the animals to have. When you're out hiking, don't forget to look down. Even on the boardwalk trail, the squirrels have been very busy. Here we have a hickory nut that they devoured. There's another one. I'll look for some that are still not eaten and show you what they look like. I took just a few steps and found 2 examples of the hickory seed. Here it is green, just probably pulled off by a squirrel, and the squirrel has already started to try to get to the meat of the fruit. That green husk, like a skin on apple or an orange, will come off and turn brown first, and then inside there's the other part of the nut that has to be chiseled away by the squirrel's sharp teeth to get to the meat of the fruit and the seed. Busey Woods is part of the Big Grove, which is a forested area that grew along the saline branch of the Salt Fork River. And in it, it has some giant trees that are well over 150 to 200 years old. Here we have a bur oak that fell about a year ago, leaving a gap in the canopy that other small trees will now take advantage of. This tree, when we had the trail, it was a soft path trail that went up to it for years until we put the boardwalk trail in. We used to have our school kids make a circle around it, and it took about 12 to 14 kids to do the circumference of the tree. This tree is another one that you can identify by its bark. It's kind of shaggy looking and called shagbark hickory. It produced those seeds I showed you a few minutes ago. We have several other hickory trees growing in the park, but this is the most common that you'll find along the boardwalk trail. We're coming up to the next interpretive spot, but just before it is a shrub that grows pretty well in the Busey Woods. It's called spice bush, and the spice bush swallowtail butterfly caterpillars feed exclusively on this plant. It has red berries that the birds will be eating pretty soon. So here's the next interpretive sign. It talks about the ways that you can help with the management of our natural areas and the ways that the Park District manages those natural areas, from cutting out invasive species like Japanese bush honeysuckle, or fire that we use to cut back at some of the weeds that don't belong in Busey Woods. Fire and flooding was common in Busey Woods when the settlers and the Native Americans were here. The saline branch used to flow through the woods, and those were the pond that we saw. But here we're looking at a maple grove. We have several of these in the woods. Maples were not part of the oak hickory bottomland forest that Busey Woods was, but with the removal of flooding on a regular basis and fire on a regular basis, maples have taken a stronghold over the forest. We do manage to allow openings for oak and hickory, so we will remove some maples when they are too dense. Maples have the capacity to overshade, so nothing can grow underneath it very well. In a couple weeks, when the fall color starts, these will be all yellow and orange and red. Very beautiful. We're coming to the fourth and final pop-out interpretive spot, again with some benches that you can enjoy resting on, listening to the birds and the insects. This area talks about wet and dry, as I mentioned before. In the spring, this was full of water, but now is very dry. So again, the animals that live here have to be able to survive during a dry period. A lot of them will finish their life cycle in just a few weeks, like the fairy shrimp, which need a drying out period for their eggs to hatch the next year. Here we have mosquito larvae. Right now, because the woods is so dry, the mosquitoes have not been a problem. But if we get rain again, please remember to put insect repellent on. And here's our salamander, the smallmouth salamander that lives in Busey Woods. If you encounter one of these, please don't handle it. It breathes through its skin and it needs the moisture on its skin, and when you handle it, that comes off. Just take a look and then gently turn over the log or the rock that you were looking under so he's back in his home. Just before we exit the boardwalk trail through the woods, I want to stop and take a look at this sprawling tree, which kind of has orangish looking bark. This is the Osage orange. It is not native to Illinois. It's native down south in Arkansas and the Mississippi area. It was planted by pioneers because if you plant them close together, they create a natural fence row. Busey Woods wasn't a farmed area for grazing cattle. And so those heads, we have several of the Osage orange trees that are growing here. Their seed is a giant brain looking seed that is eaten by squirrels and other animals later in the winter. And we do actively remove Osage orange. The signs that you saw up by the Nature Center at the entrance and the Gateway Trail are made from Osage orange that the Park District harvested and lumbered to be able to use for the signs. We are back on the power line trail where the summer relentless sun and heat is now on us. We had nice protection in the woods. It was pretty shady and comfortable. You can hear crickets, a few birds chirping. I heard a katydid, and I heard a locust a minute ago. Right now I hear a red-bellied woodpecker and a cardinal. We're going to head up the trail back out of the woods. I hope you've enjoyed our hike today. Join me again later.